So in today's tutorial, I'm going to use Inkscape version 91 to show you how you can create an award badge similar to what you see here on my screen, utilizing a circular shaped ribbon along with text that follows form. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a new document and we'll get started. So this should be your view when you first open up Inkscape. The first thing we'll do is we'll come up to the Align and Distribute menu. We'll open that up. Make sure you have Last Selected chosen from that drop-down menu. And then we'll come up here to the Edit Objects button. We'll click on that to open up that menu. Then we'll go to File, Document Properties. We're going to uncheck that box up top and then close out of that menu. And we'll go to View, make sure you have Custom selected, and then we'll go to Zoom. We're going to zoom in 1:1. So the first thing we're going to do is create a circle. So let's come over here to where it says Create Circles and Ellipses. We'll click on that. And while holding Control and Shift on your keyboard, click and drag on the canvas and create a perfect circle, kind of like that. Now let's come back to the arrow over here and click on that, and let's drag this over to the center of the screen. And come up here to where it says when locked, change both width and height by the same proportions. We're going to turn that on, and we're going to come over to the width, and we're going to get rid of whatever that number is on your screen. Get rid of it and type in 500. We want this to be 500 wide by 500 high. And then we'll come over here to where it says opacity. We're going to drop that in half. And then we'll come over to the fill tab and we're going to click the X button to turn that off. And then we'll come over to stroke paint, click on that tab. We'll click the blue button to turn that on. And then we'll come over to stroke style and we're going to give that an 80-point stroke. So we're going to type in 80 and hit enter. So it should look something like that. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to right click this and go to duplicate. And where it says stroke paint, let's come back over here. And under the HSL tab, let's change the color of this to red or whatever color you'd like. We'll just go with red for this tutorial. And then up here on this menu right here in this toolbar, when scaling objects, scale the stroke width by the same proportion, we're going to turn that off. Make sure that's turned off before we do what we're going to do next. So once that's turned off, hold Control and Shift in the keyboard and grab one of these arrows, and let's just make this about that size. You want this to be about halfway. You see where the red and the black intersect? You want that to be about half the size. So something like that should be good. And then we'll go to Path, Stroke to Path, and then we're going to click on this black ring, and we're going to right click, duplicate. We're going to turn that blue. And we'll come over to the Stroke Paint tab. Let's click the X button to turn that off. And while holding Control on the keyboard, let's just click and drag this off to the right for now. And then let's click on this black ring right here. And let's go to Path, Stroke to Path. Now let's create a square. Let's come over here to where it says Create Rectangles and Squares. Click on that. And then while holding Control and Shift in the keyboard, click and drag on the canvas and create a perfect symmetrical square, kind of like that. You want to make it about that big. And once you make it about that big, let's come over to the arrow and click on that. And let's click on this a second time to bring up these rotation handles. And while holding Control, grab one of these corners right here and just click and drag this until it is going perfectly up and down like that. We want it to look kind of like a diamond. And then while holding Shift in the keyboard, click on this red ring so we have them both selected. And we're going to align that on the vertical axis and the horizontal axis. And then we can click off of the graphic to deselect everything. Now clicking on just this blue diamond right here, make sure you could hold Control and Shift in the keyboard and click and drag one of these arrows to resize it. Make sure it's larger than the rings. We want it to be about that much larger. In fact, we might even go a little bigger than that. Maybe we'll go about that big just to be safe. And what we'll do next is you can let go of Control and Shift in the keyboard. You're not going to hold anything for this one. We're just going to take this top arrow and we're going to bring this down. We're going to click and drag this down to about there, I'd say. We want it to look kind of like that. And then we can right click this and go to duplicate. And while holding Shift in the keyboard, click on this black ring and let's go to Path, Intersection. And then we could take this next blue diamond, we can right click that and go to duplicate. And while holding Control and Shift in the keyboard, click and drag to make this about, we're going to make that about that big. We want to make it about that much bigger. and then hold Shift in the keyboard and click on this red ring. And let's go to Path Intersection. And then we'll take this first blue diamond right here, and while holding Control and Shift in the keyboard, let's click and drag this in to about there. We want to make it about that much smaller. And then while holding Shift in the keyboard, let's grab that red ring right there so we have them both selected. And we're going to go to Path Difference. And then we'll go to Path Break Apart. And then you can click off of the graphic to deselect everything, and you should have something looking like this at this point. So the next thing we'll do is we'll come over here to where it says Edit Paths by Nodes. We're going to use that tool. We can click on that. And let's click on just this red object right here. And let's click and drag over these top two nodes right here. You see these two nodes right here? We want to select them both. So select the both of them without grabbing this one or that one. We just want these top two ones selected. And if you want, you can even just hold Shift in the keyboard and click on each one. That's another way to do it. So once you have them both selected, come up here to the far left where it says Insert New Nodes into Selected Segments. We're going to click that button once, and it's going to create a new node right there. And we can click on just this one node once. Just click on it once so it has just that one selected. And we're going to click and drag this down just a little bit. Just about to about there, I'd say. And then we can go back to the arrow. And we could right-click this and go to Duplicate. And we could turn that green. And then we're going to flip that horizontally with this button right here. Flip Selected Objects horizontally. And then come up here to where it says Snap to Cusp Nodes. We're going to turn that on. And then we're going to click and drag this over here onto this red piece. So it snaps onto the corner there. And then click on just this red piece behind it in the background. You'll know you have it selected when you see the red stripe on the bottom left side of your screen. Once you have it selected, press Delete on the keyboard to get rid of it. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is we're going to come over to the Bezier Pen. And then we're going to snap the cursor onto this corner right here, and then click. And then we'll snap it onto this corner right here, and then click. And then we'll snap it onto this corner, click, and then bring it right back to the starting point. And that should give us an object sort of like that. And then we'll come over here to this side and do the same thing. We're going to click on this corner. Then we're going to snap to this corner and click, and snap to this corner and click, and we're going to do the same thing over here. So once that's done, we can come over and turn that off now. The Snap to Cusp Nodes, we can turn that off, and we can come back up to the arrow and click on that. And while holding Shift, click on this first shape that we drew over here. So we should have both of those shapes selected, and we're going to go to Path Union, and we're going to turn that blue. And we'll come over here to where it says Stroke Paint. Let's click the X button to turn that off. And let's drop the opacity in half. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is let's click on this black ring right here. Let's right-click this and go to Duplicate. And then while holding Shift, click on those blue pieces that we created. And then we'll go to Path Difference. So we should end up with something like that. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to click and drag over this entire thing so we have it all selected. We're going to right-click and go to Duplicate, and then we're going to do Path Union, and then we're going to lower this to the bottom by clicking this button right here. Lower selection to the bottom, we'll click on that, and come over to the Stroke Paint tab, and we're going to click that blue button to turn that on. Now as you can see, that is entirely too big, so we're going to come over to the Stroke Style tab, and for the join, let's give this a miter join. I think that says miter. Kind of like that. We don't want the rounded corners like that. We want this to be sharp corners. And with the width, let's try 15. Oops, hold on. Click and drag over this and type in 15. Hit enter. It's a little too small. Let's try 20. We'll do 20. Hit enter. Okay, that should work. So once you've done that, let's go to Path, Stroke to Path. And then we'll go to Path. We'll break it apart. And then go to Path Union. So we should end up with something like that. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to click on this black stripe right here. And then while holding Shift, click on this red piece right there. And then click on the green piece right there. Then you can let go of Shift. Once you have all three of those selected, go to Path Union. And then while holding Shift again, click on these blue pieces. And let's go to Path Difference. So we should end up with something like that. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to grab our magnifying glass and we're going to zoom in, click and drag over this left-hand side right here. And we're going to go back to our Bezier pen and we're going to turn the snap to cusp nodes back on and snap the cursor onto this corner right here and then click, snap it onto this corner and then click, and then snap it onto that corner up there, click, and then bring this back to the starting point. So you should end up with a shape like that. And we're going to come over to the other side and do the same thing. If you're using Inkscape version 91, you can hold the spacebar key on your keyboard and it'll allow you to drag the page over. So once you've done that, let's come over here and click on this, snap it onto that corner, and then snap it onto this corner, snap it onto there, and bring it back to the starting point. And we should end up with something like that. Now you could press 1 on the keyboard to zoom back out. We can turn that off now, the snap to custom nodes, we can turn that off. And then we can come back up to the arrow over here. And then while holding shift, let's click on that first shape that we drew so we have them both selected. And we'll go to Path, Union. And then while holding shift, click on this black shape. And let's go to Path, Difference. And then we end up with something like that. Now let's click on this red ribbon in the background. And let's bring the opacity on that all the way up. And let's come down here and let's pick a nice dark shade of blue, somewhat like a royal blue, kind of like that. And then we can click on this black ribbon in the middle. We could bring the opacity on that all the way up. And we can come back up here and we're going to pick whatever shade of red you'd like. I'm going to go with that shade right there. And then with this, we're going to click on this right here. And we're going to raise this to the top. Raise selection to the top. Press that. And we're going to turn that green. And while holding shift on the keyboard, click on this red ribbon. And let's center that up on the vertical axis. And then click off of the graphic to deselect everything. Now we're going to click on just this green circle right here. And while holding Control and Shift on the keyboard, let's click and drag this out to about there. We don't want it to be as big as the red ribbon. We want it to be just a little smaller than the red ribbon. You want to leave yourself about that much padding in there. And then we're going to come up here to where it says Flip Selected Object Horizontally. And we're going to click that once. Now nothing's going to change on your screen, but that's going to change the way the wording comes out with what we do next. So although it doesn't look like anything happened, that is a very important step, so make sure you do that. So the next thing we'll do is we're going to come over to the Create Text Objects tool. We're going to click on that. And let's just click on the canvas down here. And for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to write award logo. And make sure you use all caps letters with this, otherwise it just doesn't look right. When you have lowercase letters going inside of an arc like that, it doesn't quite look right. So I prefer to use all capital letters. And I'm actually going to use a bold font as well, so it shows up a little better. And then I'm going to go back to the arrow, and click on that. And with that selected, hold Shift and click on the circle. And let's go to Text, and let's go to Put on Path. And then we can click off of the graphic to deselect everything. Now let's click on just the green circle, click it a second time to bring up the rotation handles. And we're just going to rotate this around until the text is centered up in there. About there looks good, I'd say. And once it's there, let's click on just the text right there. And let's go back to the Edit Text tool. And I'm actually going to increase the spacing between these letters a little bit because I don't like how they look with the letters this close together. So I'm going to come up here to where it says spacing between letters. And I'm going to press up on the arrow just to give them a little bit of breathing room. And then for the size, I'm going to make this a little bigger. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to make this 48. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So then we can come back to the arrow over here and click on that. And let's click on the green circle. And let's click this a second time to get the rotation handles. And let's center this up. If you want, you can use guides to make sure it's perfectly centered. But I'm just gonna eyeball it here. And once it looks relatively centered, click on just the text right there. And let's go to Path, Object to Path. And let's turn that white. Now it's important that we turn that into a path like I just did, the Path, Object to Path, because if we don't, when you go to delete this circle, it's going to delete the text too. So once you've gotten to this point, click on just the green circle. And actually let's lower this to the bottom with this button right here. And let's hold Control and Shift in the keyboard, and let's bring this in to about, right to about there, I'd say. And then we can right click this and go to Duplicate. And let's just turn that blue for now. And let's hold Control and Shift and bring this in to about here. And let's lower this one step. Where it says lower selection one step, we're going to keep clicking that until it ends up below that blue ribbon. So I think I clicked that 2 or 3 times. It's now below that blue ribbon. And I'm actually going to turn the opacity on that all the way up. I'm going to turn that white. And then I'm going to click this right here, this green circle. I'm going to turn that all the way up. And I'm actually going to make that white, and then I'm going to click this circle in the middle. And I'm going to press F7 on the keyboard to bring up the dropper. And I'm going to click on the blue part of this logo to make it the same shade of blue. And then I can press F1 on the keyboard to bring the arrow tool back up. So what we'll do next is we'll create a star. So come over here to where it says create stars and polygons. Let's click on that. And let's hold Control and Shift in the keyboard and just click and drag to make a star, kind of like that. And then come up here to where it says stroke paint. Let's turn that off with the X button. And up here, you should have this button selected, star instead of a regular polygon. We're going to give this 40 corners. And then if I remember correctly, I believe this is 0.960. Yeah, 0.960, rounded 0, randomized 0. And then we can press F1 to get back to the arrow. And let's hold Shift in the keyboard. Actually, let's lower this to the bottom. Actually, no, we'll turn this green first, then we'll lower this to the bottom. And we're going to hold Control and Shift, and we're going to make this a lot bigger. And then we can hold Shift in the keyboard and click on this blue circle in the middle, and let's center that up on the vertical axis and the horizontal axis. And let's click off of the graphic to deselect everything. Now let's click on just this green star right here, and let's go to Path, Object to Path, and let's hold Control and Shift, and let's click and drag this down until it gets to about, right to about there, I'd say. And then hold Shift in the keyboard and click on this blue circle again. We're going to have to center that up again. We're going to go to center on the vertical axis, center on the horizontal axis. We can click off of the graphic to deselect everything. Now let's click on just this star right here, and let's press F7 on the keyboard to bring up the dropper, and let's click on the blue part of this logo to turn that blue. And then we can press F1 to go back to the arrow. Now let's take this blue circle in the middle right here. Let's right click this and go to Duplicate. And let's turn this white. And while holding Control and Shift in the keyboard, let's bring this down. I'd say down to about there. And then we'll come up here, we'll turn the stroke on. We'll come over to the Fill tab, we'll turn that off. And come over to the Stroke Paint tab. We're going to make that white. So just slide that all the way to the right and then slide this all the way to the left. And then we come over to Stroke Style, and we're just going to give that a 2-point stroke, kind of like that. And what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to make this a dotted line instead of a solid line. You can come down to this drop down over here that says dashes. We can click on that and just pick a dotted pattern from this menu that you think looks good. I'm going to give that a try and see how that looks. Alright, that works pretty good. I'm going to give that a miter join instead of a rounded join. And then once that's done, I'm going to go to Path, Stroke to Path, and then we can create a star to go in the middle here. So come back to the star tool, click on that, and hold Control and Shift in the keyboard and just click and drag to create another star. Let's turn that white, and let's come over to the Stroke Paint tab. Let's turn that off, and then come up here to where it says corners. We'll change that to 5, hit enter, and for the spoke ratio we're going to make that 3.75, I believe, 0.375. Yeah, that's what it is. 0.375, rounded 0, randomized 0, and then we can come up to the arrow over here and click on that. And we can click this a second time to bring up the rotation handles, and we can just straighten this thing out so it's standing upright. And then we could hold Shift in the keyboard and click on this circle in the middle, and we could center that on the vertical axis and the horizontal axis. And then we can click off of the graphic to deselect everything, and then click on just the star, hold Control and Shift, We could actually make this a little bigger, about that size. And then we can click and drag over this whole thing, and we can group it together, and we are now finished. So that's how you can create sort of like an award kind of logo, or kind of a vector badge with a circular ribbon along with text that follows form. So if you have any questions, just let me know, and thank you again for watching.